Okay guys, we're going to be starting our breakout pretty soon here, so maybe just wrap up whatever the last things you're working on and yeah. So we are going to continue looking at HTTP. Specifically, we're going to be looking at HTTP within the context of our node applications and APIs. So APIs being application program interfaces, or the way that we let others interact with our programs over the web. You guys have been working using like similar requests and stuff to the ones that we did this morning. How have they been going so far? So a little bit slow. Okay. Yeah. So hopefully this will help. We're going to be working through another example. This one will be similar to our GitHub avatar downloader in how we build it. So again, if there's any questions, just like shoot up a hand, like yell at me, and we can make sure that we're getting understanding as we go through. But in general, we're going to explore HTTP requests, and we're going to look at how to use request, the HTTP or the node module request. We're going to look at access tokens, headers, and environment variables, all within the context of making, a small application that can do some fetching from the GitHub API. So to start, we'll look at requests. I don't know, has anyone gotten to the point in the activities that they're starting to use requests now? Yeah, everyone's maybe around that area. So request is a node module that makes it easier for us to do HTTP requests. One of the major things it does for us is it buffers the response for us. So we noticed that this morning we had to take all of these chunks that were coming in from our HTTP request and add them together, and then only then could we use it as a coherent single body. Request makes this easy for us. It does it for us. It gives us the response back, and it gives us the body all together, not distinct. So our goal is to make an application that gets all the issues from a node repository, that should be from a GitHub repository, and displays them. So let's start by exploring the GitHub API. If we So I don't know how you guys have had a chance to go through the GitHub API documentation or not, but it's pretty long, has a lot of different things we can do with it, but I thought I'd highlight one thing. So throughout this whole page, there's like lists of different ways we can interface. This one is oh no. Is the option to get all the information it returns on a specific repository. So from this route here, we can see that we need to provide the owner of the repository as well as the repository name. And then it has a little bit of a preview of the information that it's going to return when we do this request. This path being the path that comes after the domain. So if our beginning part is like api.github.com, this is the path, like we discussed this morning, that tells us the specific location of the resource that we're trying to get. And yeah, so it's going to give us a bunch of information like this. We can see somewhere in here we have some information on issues. So we have issue comments, issue URL, and this is the information that we're going to be wanting to pull. Specifically, if I use this URI with repos and then giving it jQuery, and I give it a /issues, I can get a list of all the issues that are associated with this particular repository on GitHub. So to start, we're going to make a new project, make directory. We're going to call it get repo issues, maybe. Issues. And then once we're in it, to start a new node project, we do npm init. And it's going to walk me through the creation process. I'm going to stick with, okay, get repo issues. And I'm just going to go with all the defaults for this. Once I'm done, I'm going to make an entry point, create a new file, and we'll just call it index.js. So our goal was to create a request to this URL. So if we're doing that with request, we'll open up index. Nope. The first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to need to require request if I'm going to use it. Require request. So if I try and run this program as of now, what's going to happen? Yeah, nothing will happen, but specifically I'm probably going to get an error. And why would I be getting an error at this point? Require.request. Yeah, that might be in how I name things, but is there anything else that? Yeah, so request is a module, but I haven't installed it yet. So if I need to use a module, I need to do npm install. I'm going to say that I want to do request, and I'm going to do --save. So once I hit enter, it's going to install this repository or this module locally for me in my node modules folder, and it's also going to add it to my package.json file. So if I look in my root folder, I see that there's now this folder with all my node modules in it, and if I look in my package.json, I see that under dependencies, I now have request. So at this point, I'm able to use it within my program. So let's continue. We said we wanted to make a function that gets the issues. So we'll give it that. And similar to this morning, we'll do we'll take a callback that we can return some information to. So if I want to make HTTP request with the request module, what does anyone know my first steps? So you're saying I want to do request.get. And then what is the information that it'll need to make that? So I'll need the URL, and then it'll be a function, yeah. And this function, instead of having one thing like it did this morning, it has 3 things, yeah? We have the error, response, and body. Okay. That for now. So instead of putting the URL right in, we'll give a new variable, call it options. I'll set this equal to an object, and the first key value pair will be URL and this URL that we wanted to check out. So in string /issues. Actually, for now, we'll just do a console log of our response. And let's call this function so it runs. And let's see, node index. Oh, yes. So we're setting options here instead of URL, so we're going to pass it options instead of URL. And this is the response that we're getting. Yeah, it's a long string. So maybe let's take a look at just one part of this response. Let's look at the response headers, because that's something we were learning about this morning. No dash connection closed. Content type text HTML. Okay. So we're seeing this, we're getting no cache and our connection is being closed. Same here. And right here our body says request forbidden by administrative rules. Please make sure request header, it should say, or request has a user agent header. So this is one of the headers that we saw this morning. User agent header basically says what agent or what client is trying to make the request to the server. So basically GitHub has told us, like, you can't make this request unless you're going to set this header, this user agent header. So if we go back to our request that we're making here, in our options, we can set more than just our URL, we can also set another key value pair of headers. And this takes an entire object, and I can set any key and value that I want here, depending on the headers that I need. So the one that we wanted to use was user agent. So if here I go user dash agent, and I want to set this equal to the user agent that's making this request. So in this case, I can just say that it's a node application. And we give that another try. I see that the request is now successful because it's giving me a different set of response headers. And we can see a bunch of information here, like the content type, it's returning JSON, the length is this many bytes, the status was 200, successful request. And then we have a couple other things here, like our rate limit and our rate limit remaining. So that's something we're going to look at in a second. But first, yeah, so this is what we've been doing just now. For a request to be successful, we had to include this user agent header. This lets the server know who the agent is that's making the request. Browsers automatically do this. When we use curl, it also automatically does this. Postman will automatically set the user agent header. A lot of things just intelligently do this, but when we're making our own application, because we're essentially Postman in this case, or we're curl in this case, we need to set it ourselves. So if this error comes up, this request forbidden from the body, or we get this no cache or connection closed, one thing to check is if we're setting that user agent header. So the next thing we're going to look at is access tokens. So I believe in the activity it talks about, getting an access token from GitHub and like, yeah.
How about the user agent? Where do we check like the spreading of the key that we have to have?
Sorry.
When you set the user agent on the header,
Mm-hmm.
I guess the header has a set keys that you can use.
So let's. So these keys here,
Yes.
and the values.
User agent is not a key that is set somewhere.
Yeah, user agent is a standard header that.
How do I know that you set it like that?
Oh, I see. Well, if we didn't know beforehand, in this message here that we got back in the body, request forbidden, it tells us a user agent header. So we kind of have to, from that, assume that the key is user agent. You can also look up like different types of headers. Like if we just Google user agent header, we see there's a resource here from Mozilla. Yeah, it has it here.
And where it says
Syntax. Oh, I see. Yeah. So it's saying that this is how Mozilla would set it. But in general, like, yeah, we would have to like look it up and see like what the different headers are. In terms of what these can be, the keys can be anything. Like we can make our own headers if we were creating an application that sent and accepted things. There's not really like I'm not limited to calling it user agent, but you're right. If I did this without like capitals, then like GitHub wouldn't accept it. So yeah, it might take some searching around to see what exactly, how to set some of these. But the other thing, so we're talking about tokens. And so some APIs require access tokens, some don't. An access token in general is a unique identifier that identifies who you are, and it lets the server know when you are using the API. In terms of how each API uses access tokens, there's a lot of different reasons for it, and there's a lot of ways that they might use it, but generally they might use it to block or restrict anonymous traffic. So some APIs will not let you make any requests unless you have an access token. In terms of GitHub, they'll let us make some requests, but what GitHub does is wants to control the number of calls that are made to the API. So if we don't have an access token, GitHub says like the max amount of API calls you can make within, it's like a day or like a certain time frame, is 50. That might be fine if we're just like checking a couple of things, but if we're making our own application and we want to do a lot of tests, that's kind of low. So with GitHub, if we set an access token, it increases our number of requests that we can make to something really high, like 5,000. These access tokens also let the people who run the APIs identify usage patterns and take in a bunch of data. So they can know like, oh, these type of users, this information from it. Because with GitHub, we're getting that access token from our GitHub accounts. So it knows like some information about who we are, what we're getting, and it can probably use those for like different things. But in our case, practically using an access token will just allow us to access more and make more requests. So we're going to start by making an access token. And if I just go right to my GitHub account and I go to settings, on my settings page, on the very bottom of these options is developer settings. And with developer settings, the option I want to go into is personal access tokens. So under personal access tokens, as you can see, I have two. I have Avatar Downloader, which is like a project like you guys are doing. I have week 1, day 1 that I was using for a test recently. I'm just going to delete that one for now. And I'm going to generate a new token. Oh, I need to put my weak password in, as it likes to tell me on every page. And then I just give it a description. This doesn't have anything to do with how the token is used. It just lets me identify why I've created this. So if I say week 1, day 1, that's enough information for me, and I've generated this token. One of the key things is this is the only time it's going to give me the token. So if I copy this from the nope, the little clip here, and I leave this page, I can't get this token anymore. So I'm going to go in here. For now, I'm just going to put it in a string like that. But if I go to here and then I go back to my personal access tokens, it'll show that I have one generated, but I can't get in there and like actually get that token. This happens to you, that you generated a new token and then you kind of like lost the thing. It's not a big deal. These tokens aren't like anything special. I can delete and make as many new ones as I want. So if I no longer have this, I could just go delete and like generate a new one, and I can use that new one just as easily as I used the old one. So for using this token, we're going to need to set it also in a header. So I've set this first user agent token or header, and the second header that I want to set is going to be authorization. And then the value should be my token. The way that would probably make sense is if I just did this. Like that would make sense to me, setting the header, which is authorization, and then directly the token. GitHub wants it a little bit differently. They want the word bearer with a space before your actual token. So this is my token from GitHub. We're setting it in this header. And so if I save this and then I try to run this in the command line, I get this same set of headers back, but now I see that my rate limit is 5,000 and my remaining is 4,999. So I've used one out of my 5,000 available calls. This will let me do a lot more testing. For us, the other thing that it also lets us do is if we look back up here, it said something like my rate limit is 60 with 23 remaining. I can assure you that I didn't make 30-some calls to the API today. Depending on like how our router is set up and things and where we're using it, this rate limit can be per like router or per connection point. So if all of us collectively are making a lot of requests, we could chew through this 60 like very quickly. So just another reason we might want to be using these tokens.
What will happen if you hit 0?
It will just like not give you anything. It'll say like bad request rate limit reached or something like that. Yeah. So the next thing that is kind of going to be a problem with our little application here I guess, does anyone see like what could be a potential problem with setting my authorization token this way?
Can't change it afterwards?
Yep, that's one of them. Like I wouldn't be able to change it afterwards. What else could be a problem with setting my token this way?
Like if you give it to another user to use?
Yeah, so the suggestion is if I upload this to GitHub or give it to another user, now they have my token. And in this case, this is an authorization token that I've generated, so I can have access to GitHub. I might not necessarily want everyone else to have my token and just like use all of my requests, all the requests I have. In other cases, this token could be also have some authorization to it, so that it lets me access certain things in the API that other people shouldn't be able to access. And so in that case, I especially don't want other people to be able to access it. But in general, I should be able to share this source code with anyone, and I should also be able to keep configuration separate. Configuration by nature are things that are specific to like how I am running the application. So they'd be specific to my environment on my computer. In this case, our GitHub token is a configuration thing. In other cases, how we're connecting to a database, what the database name and password in might also be a configuration thing. If I'm running a program on my computer, I want it to connect to the database that's on my computer, and when I share it with someone else, I want them to be able to connect to the database that's on their computer. So I should separate code and config. Like this, yeah, an example is using a different database for development versus production. So one way of separating my code or my program that's actually doing the logic and the information of what I want it to do and my config is through environment variables. So everyone's operating system will run processes within an environment. A lot of us have been using Vagrant as our environment, and it sets up a lot of different dependencies and things that we've been using, but that's one example of an environment. And within this environment, a user administrator can set variables just called environment variables. If we go to terminal and we type in export, that's one way. It'll show all the environment variables associated with this environment. So up here you can see there's one set user, it knows that it's me, a bunch of other things, text domain. there's a lot of, well, not that many. There's quite a bit. But all of these, so editor, it knows I use VS Code somehow. A bunch of different environment variables. We can also, as programmers, use and set environment variables so that we can use them in our program. If I do export test variable colon, is it colon or equal? Let's see. Yeah, so one way to set a variable is use the command export key and value. So test variable equals hello guys. And I run this, and then I go export again. If I look up here, I have test variable hello guys. So if I set environment variables this way, they're useful, but they only last for the terminal's like session. So if I close this terminal and I start a new terminal, that environment variable will be like gone. It's temporary but useful. Yeah, the variable is only set for the terminal session. There's also other ways of setting environment variables. If I set the variable and run my program at the same time. So first, let's go in here, and I'll do console.log of process dot env, I think it is. If I do process.env dot, what was the one I just, we'll set a new one. I'll do test run. And if I go test run equals this here, and then I do node index.js, I run. At the start of my program, I get this here because inside I did console log of process.env.testrun. So this is the way within a Node application that I can access all the all the environment variables that I've set. So process.env, and then whatever the key is that I set here. So I also set one of, what was the other one I set? Test var. So that's still there. If I do process.env.test var, test var, and I run it, I get hello, which is what I set it to. So this is nice. It gives me a way to access environment variables, and if environment variables are kind of local to the environment that I'm running in, it might be a good way to store config, because config is also local to whatever environment it's being run in. And if in my program, anywhere I'm using something that could be considered config, I'm just going to copy this for now because I don't want to lose it. I access, say, this token from an environment variable. Dot GitHub _ token. Then I can instruct anyone who uses this application. I say, like, hey, set your GitHub token in a process environment variable, and then you'll be able to run this application, and your config will all be set up. And if they look at my code, there's no like they can't see my config or my tokens. Well, apart from this, but we'll get rid of this in a second. So that's nice, but it's a little hard to manually set environment variables all the time in the ways that we've looked at so far, and especially if the terminal gets closed and all of it gets lost every time. That's like super tedious to have to like reset it every time. So there's things that can help us to do this, and one of them is this other module called .env. So there's some docs here, but in general, .env is a convenient way of setting environment variables and separating code and config. So exactly what we're trying to do. When using .env, you can create a file, .env, which is where it gets its name, in the root directory of your project. And inside this file, you can list as many key value pairs that you want that will then be updated and set in environment variables. So to start with that.
So was that a node module or?
Yeah. So if it's a node module, what's the first thing we probably want to do? So we're going to go npm install .env --save and hit enter. Nice. And then if I look in my here, I see .env has also been added as a dependency. And the first thing to use, we want to create a new file in the root of our project, it said, called .env. And now inside of this folder, I can create any key value pairs. So the one that I wanted to use was GitHub_token, and I want to set that equal to my specific GitHub token, which I've saved here for the time being. I can finally get rid of it from this document, and I can add it. I can add it here. If I wanted to add other things, if I had a database username, database, I could set here anything specific to config or specific information that's related to a user's environment, they could set in here. Now with .env, just setting that file is not enough to get them loaded into environment variables. We also have to require the module itself in my program. So if I look in my notes and we go to for every module that we use, there'll be a corresponding npm page with documentation. So if it ever says something like use .env or use require, and you're kind of unsure about how to use that or like what is everything you can do, if you just search npm in Google plus the name of that module, there'll be a page like this that gives you usually pretty helpful information on how to use it. So here we see that we created a .env file. And we can set specific variables. And then it tells us right at the very top, as early as possible in your application, require and config.env. So if we add this to the top of our file here, we're going to be getting the .env module, and it's going to do its thing and load all of those environment variables from this .env file into like real environment variables. So now when I call process.env.github token, it should be the same token that's set in this file. So let's test and make sure everything's set up the way we want it to be. Node. So if we did it correctly, our rate limit is still 5,000. So that means that means here it's pulling the correct GitHub token. If I ask it to get GitHub token n with an extra n, it should, yeah, see, we got a connection close. Our rate limit is 60, and we only have 8 remaining. So someone's been making requests while we've been doing this. Yeah. Nice. So we've added the .env. The last thing is that some of application configuration should be kept private. We often need to include secret keys. This GitHub token is kind of a secret key. I mean, it wouldn't be the end of the world if it got out to other people, but like, we don't want to just easily give it to everyone. It could even include passwords, which is like maybe a database password, maybe like user information. We definitely don't want that to get out. So anything that we want to publish that's confidential, we want to store it in configuration separate from our code, but we also want to make it secret. So right now, this .env file is just in the root of my project. If I upload this to GitHub or something, it's still going to be included. So I still have the problem. It's not right in the file as plain as it was before, but it's still viewable by anyone who uses this. So one option to fix this is to create a new file, a specific file that Git uses. So .git ignore. Some of us might have used this already. The main thing, or like a very useful thing for git ignore, is to ignore node_modules folder, so that every time I upload this to GitHub or share it with my friends, they don't also have to download all of the modules that my project depends on. They can just do npm install locally when they get the project, and that'll get all the modules for them that they need. Saves on bandwidth. It also it makes the project lightweight and easy to share. But in this case, we also want to ignore our env file. So by including this into the .git ignore, now if I this project's in a larger repository, so I'm not going to create a new Git here, but you'll see I'll post the link to the Git repository for this whole project. That this .env file will not be there. But by doing this git ignore, it says ignore this .env, don't track it, don't upload it anywhere, and you can just keep it locally. So that's nice. Now my configuration is both separate from my code and also secret. So those are kind of the two things that we were aiming for. So keeping code and configuration separate allows us to hide our configuration while still being able to share the source code. We use a git ignore file to exclude certain files from our version control system. So this means that everyone who wants to run the application would need their own .env file. And because of this, it's a good idea to create a .env.example file that you do commit, and this will allow you to inform other developers of the environment variables that they have to set. So right now, if they get it and they try to run, it's not going to work, because I guess it will work in this case, but they won't have the token set. If we want everyone to have their token set, or if this application required more heavily on this configuration and it wouldn't run, it's hard for a user to tell exactly what they would need to set. They'd have to dig through our code and look and find this and say oh, I guess I need to have a .env file that has GitHub token. Instead of doing that, we're going to create a new file. Oops, not there. And we'll call it example.env or example.env. And inside this, we can copy the format of the env file that we want and just remove the data that we have locally. So if I download this project, I can say, oh, they've got a example.env. I can see what my env file should look like. So I'll create an env file. I'll add in my own GitHub token, my own database username, and any other key value pairs that are set here. And if they've done it correctly, if I enter all of the information on the right-hand side, application should be configured and should run as expected.
So you just have to have that .env and the .gitignore files in the same folder that you're committing to your GitHub repository?
Yeah.
You don't have to like link it within the code?
No. Git is smart. It'll look for a gitignore, and then it'll remove. It does have to be in the root of your folder though. So like if I were to put this .gitignore deeper, it wouldn't find it. Yeah, so in terms of our little GitHub application right now, we've got it set up with configuration, and we've got it returning something. I guess our last quick thing we have to do is to like actually use the data to do something. So log response headers. We're saying that we want to pass this get issues a callback, and from that we can kind of assume that this callback is going to handle all of the all of the formatting of the output. So we'll call back our callback, and we will give it the error and the body. And we'll run get issues, passing it in a callback that gets the error and body like we're saying. And in here we're going to go if error log something went wrong. Else console log body. Get rid of that. So this is the body that we're getting back. And it's a big list of issues. We can get a better idea if we so we see the opening bracket is a square bracket, so that means it's an array. It's an array of objects, this being the first object, and this tracks or represents a single issue. It's got URL, repository labels, comments, ID, title. Title might be something that we want to get. It's got the user that made the request. Bigger. It's got some labels, and then down here it has a state, whether it's open or closed. So in GitHub, people can submit issues, and if they're open, they're still they're not resolved, and if they're closed, they're resolved. So in our callback, if there's no error, we're going to do body, and we're going to use a for each loop for each issue, because body is an array, and we know it's an array of issues. We want to, if that issue is .state, because that was the one property that we looked at, if that equals open, then we're going to do console log just big O plus the issue dot title, I think it was. Else the issue's closed, so we're going to console log big X for closed plus issue dot title. Body.forEach is not a function. So I think similar to this morning, body right now that's being returned is just a string. So we're going to have to do json.parse of the body. Oops. And then we get this big list of all the issues that the particular repository has. So all of these look like they are open, and we can see all their titles. So this guy wants jQuery to support data type binary. We have an error where map fails with large arrays in Chrome. It's not possible to listen to events on shadow root. These are a bunch of just issues that people have made with jQuery. And there are no, this API endpoint that we have here returns the most recent, like 80 issues or something. So those would all be open because they're the most recent ones, haven't been closed. But if we did see one that was closed, we would see an X beside it because we're filtering. Yeah, any questions on kind of the flow of this, of the difference between setting configuration data versus our code? Yeah. This is fairly similar to what you guys are going to be doing with your GitHub avatar downloader. So any questions might be good to like pose them here, because I'm sure a lot of other people will have them too, or are thinking of the same question now, or hasn't, or will think of it in the future when they're jumping into this.
Seems like a lot of new stuff. I don't even know where to start with questions, honestly.
Yeah.
Send back to us as quick as
I don't know. Yeah, I'll send you this, guys, or this in the lecture notes, as well as this has a bit of information on where to find .env and some other things and how to set it up. But yeah, request makes things a bit easier than using that HTTP module, which is kind of annoying to have to like buffer all of our data every time. Or .env makes it a bit easier to set all these environment variables. So yeah, you'll get a little bit of practice with both of these. Let me know if anything comes up, and I will post these notes for you very soon. Cool. Thanks, guys.